Good afternoon. I hope everyone enjoyed their lunch. Before I present the next speaker, whoever lost a medical card, we have found it and it is located at the sign up area. So, whoever has lost a medical card, we have found it and it's located at the sign up. All right. Our next talk, titled Agencies in the Age of AI Evolution, Not Extinction, presented by Keanan Koppenhaver. This talk charts the journey of web agencies from 2014 to today and looks ahead to the future with AI. So, everyone, let's give Keanan Koppenhaver a nice round of applause.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for showing up to the first talk after lunch. I know this is always a tough slot for folks, so we have some things sprinkled throughout that I hope you all enjoy. So yeah, let's just dive right into it. Mentioned kind of 2014 as a timeline. This is a website that I was working on back in 2014, and I was a relatively mid-sized agency. This was a multi-month project. It included a designer, a team of developers. We went through wireframes, hi-fi mockups, all of that stuff. This is a pretty big project, but you see the items in the nav. We've got the about page, services, industry, just a bunch of pages. This is essentially a brochure site, right? And so contrast that sort of multi-month process with multiple team members, multiple thousands of dollars of budget, with kind of the state of what some AI tools can do today. So if we look at, this is basically a version of this website that I put together from a single prompt. No sort of back and forth, no editing, no adjusting. And you can tell the difference, right? You can see that this is much more polished, but it did capture kind of the essence of the site. It gives me a really good starting point to, if I wanted to go back and forth with it, I could do that. And you can start to envision that these sorts of projects might not be, multi-month endeavors anymore. This is another kind of similar tool, and you can see it made some different design choices. But overall, in kind of a single shot prompt, it was able to capture the aesthetic of what I was trying to do, and would happily give me all of this sort of HTML code. And so I show this as kind of a representative and a level set for what we're going to talk about today with how agencies need to evolve with the presence of these tools. So when I started seeing this, it made me think of, over the course of my career, like how many of these types of projects were kind of the core of what I was building for clients and what I was doing for them. Because if these were the things that I was saying, okay, this is what I bring to the table, these sorts of tools are kind of causing the ground to shift under that a little bit. So I do just want to set a little bit of expectations as folks are coming in here. For what this talk is not and what this talk is. So this talk is not going to be just me standing up here hyping AI. I think that's very important. And to that end, I actually need a couple audience volunteers real quick. I'm going to come down with y'all. And we have these cool buzzers that it will be your responsibility to, if I say something that you feel like is just hype and unfounded and you want me to kind of explain some more, you have to press the buzzer, and I will go back and try the last couple sentences again. So can I get a couple volunteers real quick? All right. Well, so I appreciate your willingness to fact check me. And like I said, I want to keep this very sort of grounded in reality and useful for everybody. This is also not going to be necessarily a how-to look at various AI tools at all. A lot of the other talks you've either seen this morning or are coming later this afternoon go a lot more into how to use specific tools and where they fit in your workflow and that sort of stuff. So we're not going to do that here. This is also not going to be a Chicken Little, sky is falling sort of doomsday prediction. AI is changing things for sure, but we want to be pretty realistic about how that's going to look. So what this talk is, we're going to start with kind of a set of truths and things that I believe about AI and the technology overall, and kind of the strategies that I see for agency folks and freelancers that evolve from those truths. We're going to take a look at specific strategies that y'all can implement, and my goal is that you all leave here with actionable sort of things you can implement in your business to continue to evolve it in this new age that we're in. So a little bit of background on me and my friend, the polar bear here. My name's Keanan. I've been working in WordPress a long time, since about 2013, in and around the world of agencies that whole time, but now I help agency and freelance folks use AI in their business. So this is the one slide that you probably want to take a picture of, take your phone out. If you want this whole slide deck, you can go to this URL right here and grab it. So I always give folks a couple seconds to linger on this slide so that you don't feel like you have to take pictures of every slide as we're going along. You can download the 9 megabyte or so PDF of this at this URL. It also gives me a chance to catch my breath after jogging to the back of the auditorium and back, so that's good. Perfect. So I said we were going to start with 3 truths, and I wrote the slide and then felt very uncomfortable with how arrogant it was, and so I decided to call them the 3 trends instead. These are things that I think are true, but I don't know are universally true, so I'm going to say that they are trends that I'm seeing that I think agency folks and freelancers should be aware of. So number 1, the handcuffs are sort of off these DIY tools. Like, for example, this is apparently the personification of Squarespace. But all of these tools that have been sort of in the mix of fair. This is ChatGPT's personification of Squarespace, not the actual personification. Appreciate the fact check on that. But all of these tools that have kind of existed in the same realm as custom development and people who work on WordPress, but have always had their own limitations. A lot of that is kind of shifting. So in the old world, we kind of think about tools like Squarespace and Wix and some of these others as kind of platforms that are just kind of enclosed and self-contained, and they have limited capabilities based on what those companies decide to add to their feature set. They're kind of hard to extend. You can't really make plugins or things for them. And a lot of times you couldn't get too far down the rabbit hole of customization. If the drop down for what sort of top margin you wanted to add to a heading only had 5 options, like those are the 5 options you could add. You couldn't do things like go completely custom with these tools. And this has been a focus of the WordPress project recently with the data liberation and export stuff. But there was limited capability to say, like, take your Squarespace site and move it over to Wix or whatever, things like that. There was not really a good way to replicate similar sorts of sites in these different tools. And so these were all selling points of, okay, if you need these sort of features or functionality, this is why you would get someone to help you build a custom site on WordPress or something like that. But what we're seeing in the new world is, every other week it feels like I see a new tool or an existing company launch on social media, and their one and only main interface is just the chat box, right? This week it was Airtable, so you can now build anything you want on Airtable just by kind of putting something in a chat box. And this means that users aren't limited by that like 5-option dropdown anymore. For example, those chat boxes that are built into those tools know how to navigate those platforms, and even tools like ChatGPT and Claude, for example, can help you do things in these platforms. So, for example, unfortunately, my work takes me into Salesforce quite a bit. And I don't know a lot about Salesforce, and it's very confusing to me, but ChatGPT is happy to walk me through if this is what I want to do in Salesforce. Okay, go to this menu, it's nested under this thing, and even though it doesn't have access to Salesforce directly, it's able to coach me through that. So in the same way that even though Squarespace is a closed platform, ChatGPT can probably help you navigate settings in Squarespace too. And this is the biggest thing, especially for folks who have patience, know what they want, and are willing to be curious about these tools. AI is basically endlessly patient, and it can write code, which platforms are standardizing on. So before, where there was no way to access the code in a tool like Squarespace or Wix, what companies are realizing is that code is a thing that AI is very capable of writing, and if they give that access to their users, it makes their platform that much more powerful. So this is kind of a core tenet of what WordPress has known for years, but other places are catching up to that too. And the last thing I'll say here is the browser is now kind of an API in its own way. So we talked about Squarespace and things not really being connected to other tools or being automatable, but any of these large language models like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini can take screenshots. So if I'm seeing something weird in my Squarespace dashboard, I just screenshot it, I jump it into ChatGPT and say, this is broken in this way, can you help me fix this setting? And it's able to walk me through that. There are also language models that can use, basically take over your computer and actually move your mouse and click things and do things, and same thing in the browser. which means that even for platforms without an API, as long as you can load them in the browser or it can show up on your computer, they're now accessible to these AI tools. And I saw this firsthand. I was in Manila in February, and my nephew, who is 8 years old, requested through my sister-in-law to have a business meeting with me. So we put it on the calendar. He apparently found out via YouTube somehow that I was a programmer. And so he brought in this giant roll of craft paper, and he unrolled it. It was probably 15 feet long. And he had a meticulous business plan for this game that he wanted to build in Roblox, which I only have very limited familiarity with. He was very immersed in as an end user, but he had heard that you could build games on Roblox. And this is very much fits the shape of what we were just talking about. It is a tool that's mostly kind of low code unless you get really under the hood. And then you can write code to build games in a scripting language called Lua, which I am not familiar with. I am a programmer, but my tools are PHP and Python and JavaScript, those sorts of things. So Lua was very new to me. I had programming knowledge. He had specific sort of requests and was very able to see something, know that he didn't like it, and want to change it, and be very specific about what he wanted to change. And so he and I spent a lot of time sitting with Claude and having Claude help us build a Roblox game. And I was only there for about a week, just ahead of WordCamp Asia this year. But we were able to get something that was relatively functional, even in a platform that I wasn't familiar with, and he didn't know the programming side of things, just by having it help us write some code, putting it up on the screen, like I said, taking screenshots and dumping it back into the assistant and saying, here's what I'm seeing, what's going wrong, that sort of thing. And so that's, that was kind of when it clicked for me that even these platforms that we feel like are kind of closed off, these tools are cracking them wide open in some ways. And I don't know if y'all have seen this, but the WordPress project recently announced that they are forming an AI team as well. So WordPress is getting in on the fun here, and the exact shape of that remains to be seen, but this kind of technology will absolutely impact WordPress as well. And I think the kind of key takeaway from this section is that non-technical users now have access to basically unlimited developer guidance and often implementation. A lot of these tools are happy to write code for people. And that just has to change how agency folks present themselves. If your entire value was taking a customer request and translating it into code, that is something you kind of have to reevaluate a little bit. And all of these DIY tools that we might consider like down market, so if a customer didn't have the budget or capabilities to take on like a custom WordPress project with us, we might say, well, you can take something like Squarespace and Wix for a few dollars a month and use that. These platforms are all going to get a major upgrade, and in my opinion, become legitimate competitors with kind of the most basic level of code writing, et cetera. Cool. Second truth. This is inflammatory on purpose, but it's not an original idea. Jonathan Stark wrote this book a few years ago called Hourly Billing is Nuts, which is a great read if you haven't read it. But in my opinion, billing purely by the hour as an agency is a dead model with these new tools. Let's get into a little bit of why. So generally, the philosophy that Jonathan Stark outlays in his book is, as you get better at your job, you can do more work in less hours. If you start your career charging whatever $50 an hour for some dev work, and over the resulting 2 years, you get twice as good at your job, and you're still charging $50 an hour, you kind of have cut your effective rate in half, right? Because you're doing twice as much work for the same amount of money. And so the counter to this is, well, okay, as you get better, you raise your hourly rate, right? But at some point, there is a cap to what clients will realistically pay. If you come in and you say, great, I'm a developer, I charge $500 an hour, I charge $1,000 an hour. First of all, that's a very easy apples-to-apples comparison with whoever else they might be talking to. You say, well, okay, Keanan, you charge $500 an hour. We have this other developer over here who only charges $100, and then you get into the sort of value conversation. But realistically, it's a number that when it gets to a certain size, it makes people uncomfortable like seeing that on a piece of paper. So there's a natural like limit to, okay, get better, raise your hourly rate that you'll eventually hit. And AI actually completely changes this equation. So in my example just before, we said that over 2 years you make it twice as fast at doing what you want to do with your job. But by using AI tools in a certain way for anything from writing code to clarifying requirements for tickets or things like that, you can actually become much more efficient than that in a much shorter time. And so it basically accelerates the time that it will take you to hit your realistic sort of hourly rate cap, right? And so let's take a look at an example of this to make it a little more specific, because I know some folks are getting itchy buzzer fingers out there. So we'll get specific here. So in the world of SEO, and I'm not an SEO person, but I've talked to a bunch of folks in the SEO world. One of the things they do for clients quite frequently is called a content gap analysis. So this is basically look at my website, look at all the content I've written, think about my competitors and all that sort of stuff, and where are there opportunities for me to write different kinds of blog posts or choose different topics, things like that. The asterisk is here on this statistic because it's kind of just a general survey of websites I found, public pricing that I could find, and comments from folks on Reddit. But traditionally, for most folks, this seems to take anywhere from 8 to 10 hours, and they charge between $1,000 and $5,000 for it, given the typical variance of different companies. So in the world of AI, I tried this last night with ChatGPT, and this is the only place where we're going to dive specifically into a tool. But it took 57.5 seconds to run this for me. And I have a question mark there under the price because I didn't actually pay for this result. It's included with the money that I pay ChatGPT every month anyway. And so it's kind of hard to say like what that looks like from a pricing perspective. But if I was pricing hourly, I don't think I would price in increments of 60 seconds or less. And so let's actually just take a look at the output here and see what it looks like. So this is the prompt that I used. I said, please perform a content gap analysis for my website, include areas where the overall SEO could be improved, as well as gaps and content pillars to focus on. And so this is where, if you haven't explored this set of ChatGPT, you'll notice I'm using a model called O3, and it is what's known as a reasoning model. So instead of just using its training data and spitting back an answer like you might be used to with ChatGPT, you can see here it says it thought for 32 seconds. And so it basically kind of clarified what I was asking. It decided to search the web and research my website. It researched my personal website, my axe.com account, looks like my LinkedIn as well. It did a bunch of research on some agencies who might be competitors to mine. I'm flattered that it thinks EY is a competitor. And it did all of this kind of thinking and using tools and searching the web and all of that stuff. And at the end of those 32 seconds, it then took the additional, what's 57 minus 32, 25, to output this result for me, right? So it started with this snapshot of my current SEO position. It basically told me in many words, you only have a single page on your website, what are you doing? It talked about, what... It's true, I do have a blog with some articles on it, but yes, it's mostly just the homepage. It found some of what it considered my competitors and told me kind of what they're doing. The key differentiation is that this particular website has hundreds of indexable assets that let them rank for all sorts of things. So again, kind of chastising me in that way for not having a bunch of blog posts on my site. And then it got into the gap analysis. So this is the kind of thing that it would recommend that I write based on what I say that I do on my homepage, what it can find out about me on social media, and what it thinks would be really helpful. So this is very detailed, and it even at the end here gets into like timelines for how to do these things, and like things like add descriptive alt text on some images, or make sure I have an XML sitemap, which I actually do, and I've submitted it to Search Console. So that was something that it caught that I had already done, kind of a false positive. But it also gives me a roadmap for like, okay, cool, Q3 is starting in a month or so, or no, a couple days. Here's like the things you should do here, and then kind of walking through this plan. And so while I wouldn't recommend just like copy pasting this out of ChatGPT and sending this to a client as is, you can see how this is a really strong sort of starting point where I could put this into like a Google Doc, for example, and then put my own spin on it and add kind of my own like individual thoughts, right? And so this is kind of what I'm saying of this compression of like something that we kind of baselined at 8 to 10 hours, and it can get me 80% maybe of the way there in a minute or so. That's where the hourly sort of pricing model kind of breaks down a little bit. Cool. And so again, just kind of to sum up, like hourly pricing kind of doesn't work in a world where folks are effectively using AI, especially the kinds of tasks that agencies normally take on, whether you're an SEO agency, marketing agency, web development agency. A lot of those tasks are language tasks, which large language models are quite good at. And so this kind of breaks down. And number 3, this is both meant to hopefully surprise and inspire, but I'm just generally seeing that the bar for deliverables is way higher. So I think we're rapidly moving to a world where, especially as our clients get more exposed to these AI tools, where instead of expecting static mock-ups for particular features and things, clients will probably start to expect things like working prototypes. And even like in the case of our ChatGPT report, If it's not exactly the final shape of what we're producing, as if it runs in the browser, it's way better at kind of communicating what you're trying to get across than a static mockup. We have things like AI note-taking tools, which means you can get on a call with a client and the same day kind of turn around a report summary of what you talked about. And depending on how you feel about AI writing code for you, you can work much faster on things like urgent feature requests, right? And so you can use those tools that you have available to you. And so this is kind of forcing us all to up level in that way and think about, is there a even better version of this deliverable that I'm giving to my client that will help kind of save us all time. And I think it just boils down to the fact that expectations are fundamentally shifting, right? Especially as, like I said, our clients see these tools go into the market and see what's possible with them. We need to show that we're adopting them and using them in our work as well. And I think how fast these expectations are shifting depends on what industry you're in. I was having a conversation earlier about there are thousands, millions of people, even in just the US, who have never used ChatGPT and don't know what it is. And so if those are your clients, maybe you're on a bit of a longer timeline of this is not kind of as urgent right away. What we are seeing though is, especially in the tech sector, these are memos from Shopify, Duolingo, and Fiverr, basically talking about how AI is core to their business. And if you are someone who's working at these companies, you have basically a mandate to sort of figure out how to use these tools in your work. So obviously that's a little bit of a leading indicator because Silicon Valley tech companies always jump on these trains way sooner, but I do think it's kind of a indication of things to come. And this is an analogy that I kind of thought of. Our competitor, especially in the early days of any starting a new agency, the kind of clients you talk to, it's always like, well, you guys seem great, but you're a little expensive. And I know, my cousin kind of writes some HTML, or my neighbor's kid builds websites. Maybe I should just get him to go build me something. And so I think in some ways these tools are kind of that equivalent for the modern era, right? It's like, well, I heard I can just build a website on ChatGPT, or Vercel has this thing called V0 where I can just type some stuff and it shows me my website. Why shouldn't I just use that? And I think what it comes down to is if you can start to use those tools to deliver higher quality deliverables to your clients, that's how you can really communicate that, yes, this is the value I bring over trying to do this yourself, right? So in Ethan Mollick's book, Co-Intelligence, which I would highly recommend, this is a book cover image you want to remember, he starts the book basically saying that his discovery of AI technology took him through 3 sleepless nights. The first one was full of excitement, the second one was full of fear, and the third one was him trying to kind of figure out what to do with all this new technology. And so if you've been following along closely with the talk, you may realize that we've already covered kind of the first 2. So let's figure out what to do. So I see kind of 3 paths that are sort of the inversion of the 3 trends that we saw earlier for agencies. Small to mid-market agencies probably want to focus on one of these. If you're a bigger agency, there's potential for adopting multiple of these approaches. But there's kind of 3 ways that I see that folks can really kind of navigate this. And number 1 is embrace complexity, right? So we saw in the ChatGPT output that AI still gets it wrong a lot of the time. And especially when you have custom integrations or things that are highly nuanced, even the best sort of AI coding tools, we'll look at this from a coding perspective, are not going to be able to write the code that's needed for that. And so moving from building things that are just brochure sites for your clients to building things like resource centers with multiple different media types and all sorts of things like that, or custom calculators that use proprietary data. So for example, a friend of mine works for an insurance company, and so they wanted a very custom calculator on their site to allow their customers to sort of get an idea of what they might pay for insurance based on all these different factors. And that data was all internal, so AI didn't have access to that. And I put print CMS up on here as a reminder for myself. A while ago, I worked on a project where WordPress needed to push to a different CMS to publish an actual newspaper. But the only documentation that existed for that system was from the 90s, and it was written in Italian. So in that case, AI would not have been able to kind of find anything on the open internet about that, and it wouldn't have known how to help my client if they wanted to kind of cut me out of that loop, write anything for that system. That was kind of something we had to figure out as we went. So this path really requires that you have sort of a deep technical expertise in one area or another. So maybe you're really deep in WordPress and the PHP side, or you're really deep in React and writing blocks and that sort of stuff, et cetera. Typically requires you to have some senior folks on your staff because that, again, leads to that sort of deep technical expertise. And this is a really great fit if you have clients who have highly technical problems. So if most of your client base, all they really need is, spin up a website, set it up, get it going, and it's a pretty basic feature set, you might have some difficulty embracing this approach. But if you do have clients where their systems are very complex, there's either a lot of data or infrastructure or anything like that that's running on the back end, you might find some success here. And the basic idea is that kind of if you go along this path, continuing to upskill yourself and use these tools yourself internally is what's going to kind of keep you ahead of this AI curve and allow you to take on even more difficult problems. So path number 2 is what I call simplicity and speed. And in this scenario, basically, we talked about kind of moving away from hourly billing. This takes the approach of, okay, what sort of consistent, productized, fixed rate services can I use, and then adopt sort of AI tooling and this sort of stuff internally. And what this looks like is, things like building a website or a web page in a week, or a report that has a fixed scope. So, for example, every month I'll send you, a report on all your website's metrics and performance. And it will cost X amount of dollars. But then if on the back end I'm using AI tools to help me generate that report, I can kind of get faster and better at that sort of thing. If you do still want to do like development and that sort of thing, that can fit into this model too, basically as kind of a fixed length, sort of, okay, we're going to like sprint on this problem for a week or two and see kind of what we can get done. And this is best for agencies who have like a wide range of services that are relatively popular already, or you kind of know that your clients have started to kind of want the same thing from you over time. And so those are good candidates for kind of putting in this like productized sort of wrapper. And the key thing here is basically as you adopt more and better sort of internal tooling and you get better at delivering these things, your margin on them basically goes up because you're charging the same amount, but your cost, your time to put these things together goes down. And so that's kind of how you succeed here, is you can both expand the portfolio of things you offer, but also because you're doing fixed rate pricing, the better you get at these things, the better it is for you. And number 3, pivot into AI offerings. So this is kind of the obvious, I think, takeaway from this whole trend is you are sitting here learning about all this stuff. Your clients are not sitting here learning about all this stuff. And so as you kind of learn and upskill on all these tools, like we mentioned, down the road at some point, your clients are going to probably have this same sort of realization and start going through the same process. And so if these are tools that you feel comfortable kind of coaching and bringing your clients along on, you can use the fact that you already have relationships with these people and they already trust you in a world full of people who just want to hype up AI and make dubious claims on social media and all that stuff. You can use that trust that you've built with these people to kind of be their resource as they adopt these tools too. And so this is kind of a new set of technologies that you can incorporate into your offering if it makes sense for you and your clients. And obviously this works best for agencies who already have strong sort of ongoing client relationships. Again, that trust factor is a big thing there because there are hundreds of thousands at least of people kind of claiming to teach AI on the internet right now. And for me at least, the most productive conversations I've had are with people I already know and trust because there's that understanding there. So despite all of this, and I don't know what y'all's sentiment read on how I'm feeling about all this is, but I'm going to be pretty explicit, is that I think agencies are actually one of the best businesses to be in right now. There's a lot of folks who are taking huge swings on AI products and brand new AI tools and like cutting edge, bleeding edge sort of technological advancements. But I think agencies are super solid right now. And 3 of the reasons that I think that is true are, number 1, y'all have quite a bit of flexibility generally. You're not, for example, when OpenAI wants to train a new AI model, they have to invest, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars and then just wait for a month and see kind of what model comes out on the other side. That's not a lot of flexibility, and it's a pretty big risk, right? But if you're an agency or a freelancer, you have a much shorter cycle of like, we're going to try this new thing, we're going to see how it works with our existing clients, we're going to maybe try and get a couple new clients on this, and iterate from there. You're able to be a lot more flexible as new tools come out. Second is cash flow. Again, OpenAI is raising all that money. They're tossing it all into an AI model and kind of seeing what happens and hope they can get enough people paying them $20 a month on the back end to make up for that. But agencies generally have a much quicker sort of cash flow conversion cycle where you're working for clients, every month, every quarter. And so again, that cash flow is money in the bank that you can use to feed into the flexibility of what an agency is. And finally, I hope this has been clear through this whole talk. I firmly believe that with all of these tools, there still needs to be a human in the loop at some point. And if you think about kind of the traditional agency process, you kind of already are a human in the loop between your client and WordPress, right? They could go into WordPress and work with it directly and see what they get, but they're trusting you to be that human in between them and the technology. And so, just like any of these AI tools, you can't really trust the output, and they work best in the hands of someone who knows how to do the thing themselves they're asking it to do. You being that human in the loop makes you actually even more valuable in the world where these tools are changing so quickly and everything's just kind of shifting on its head. So, in my opinion, not at least exploring these tools and seeing what they could do, like every 6 months or so, is kind of like fighting against having some sort of web presence in 2010. I'm not saying that everybody had a multi-page sort of website with everything, but if you weren't at least on LinkedIn or somewhere where people could find you on the web in 2010, and you were working in our field, that was obviously difficult. But I also think that there's this huge opportunity to, like I said, amplify things you're already doing and your existing capabilities. But also, I'm kind of excited to see what new things that this will unlock for folks. I know for me, there are at least a couple things where I've thought over the years, like, oh, that'd be really cool to do, and that'd be like a really cool service that I can offer people. But it's pretty expensive to deliver. It's going to take a lot of my time, and I don't think I could charge for that in a way that would make sense. But these tools have kind of caused me to reevaluate a lot of that, and so. I think it's time to, if you've got your notebook of ideas collecting dust in your desk, it's time to dust that off and see, okay, are there any of these things that I've thought about for years that I can kind of reimagine and do in a new way? So I wanted to leave plenty of time for Q&A because folks generally do have a lot of questions, and it looks like we did that. So again, my name's Keanan. Because my parents named me very uniquely, I am at K Koppenhaver on almost every social media platform that exists. That's the URL for the slides again, but if folks have questions, we have mics up here, it looks like, or you can just shout and I'll repeat your question for the recording. But thanks for having me, and I want to answer some questions for y'all. Yes.
Hi, my name is Anthony. Everybody can hear me okay, even on the web? Now, please refresh my mind. I think when you first discovered using AI, you had an existential crisis or something?
Yeah, so we can go back to this slide here. This is kind of how it went for me as well. I was generally like, these tools are awesome, and then I was like, I took a step back, I was like, these tools can do a lot of my job, and I was like, well, we need to figure out what to do with that, so.
At one point, do you kind of feel like maybe it's just, you're, by using AI, you're cheating, you're giving yourself an unfair advantage?
Sure, good question. So I'll repeat the question for the recording. The question basically was, by using AI, do you ever feel like you're cheating or giving yourself an unfair advantage? I think there is quite a bit of that going around. The thing that launched, I think either just this morning or last night, late sometime, is this product called Cluely. And their tagline is basically cheat on everything. So it's like a thing that just kind of runs on your machine. It watches what you're doing. It helps you if you're in interviews or client calls. It's constantly interjecting and trying to help you. They have gone deep down to we're just going to be controversial to be viral, and so we're saying all this stuff. But I also think that at some level they actually believe that. Fundamentally, I use AI quite differently. I think, for example, when I was crafting this talk, I basically had a brain dump of, okay, here's all the things I probably want to include in my talk. And that was things that just I kind of came up with on my own. And I said, hey, can you please help me organize these into an outline? And then I kind of go back and forth with it and say, are there any sections that feel like we need to expand them a little bit? Are there any things that people are going to be kind of skeptical about or curious about or want to know more? And I kind of work with it to shape it that way. And then I obviously, once we get to an outline, I dive in and build the slides. And so I think if you're not outsourcing entire things to these tools, it makes it hard for me to feel like you're cheating per se. It's a technology that exists, and you as someone who is curious and sitting in this seat right now, have knowledge of it, and it's something you can use. I think there will always be folks who say, it's the same thing with any type of automation that's occurred over the years, right? There's the handcrafted element of something, and then there's the automated sort of factory version of something, mass-produced version of something, right? And so There are absolutely blog posts on the internet that took someone 2 months to write, and they did everything by hand. They did all the research by hand. And there are blog posts where the entire site was spun up in one day, and it now has 1,000 blog posts on it. So it's kind of a personal value judgment on which of those is more effective, and I think the answer is probably somewhere in between. But like I said, all the processes that I use AI for are still kind of initiated by me, and I'm very much in the loop on, and so I don't personally feel that way. But
Thank you. Two follow-up questions.
sure.
Versus how do you spell fluently? And two, how do you protect your professional, personal privacy using AI tools?
Good question. Number one, how do you spell Cluely? I'm really regretting giving them even more free press at this moment, but it's just Clue, like the board game or something you discover in a mystery, and then ly at the end. That's it. And the second question was, how do you protect your privacy while you're using AI tools? Is that it? Okay.
Like, AI, how do you try to make sure AI is not, I think we're thinking, what I'm thinking of phrasing it as using your stuff to share with others in the future.
Yeah, good question. So, yeah, it really depends on the model that you use and what their sort of rules and regulations are. So, for example, if we go over here to ChatGPT, I can say, like, based on my history, tell me everything you know about me, right? This is a super risky prompt to do live on stage. But basically, ChatGPT has the concept of memory, right? And so as I'm going through, it's like seeing what I'm prompting, knowing that, like, so for example, it knows I'm in Chicago. It knows I usually it knows I live near Wrigley Field. So it knows a lot. It knows a lot about me, right? It knows a lot of the history of things that I've built over the years and things like that. And so OpenAI is kind of leaning into that and saying, okay, we want to be kind of like Google is able to target ads to you. Like, we want the version of ChatGPT that a person gets to use to have that knowledge about them. Other tools like Claude, we can actually try that as well. They take a more approach where I don't think this will know as much about me. This is called Claude. It's made by a company called Anthropic, which is an OpenAI competitor. So it's basically like ChatGPT, but it's a different underlying model. But their privacy policy basically states that they don't use anything that you put into the web interface to kind of train future versions of the models. And so you can see, I don't have access to any information about you or your history or previous conversations. And so it really just boils down to which model you use. And so OpenAI and Anthropic or Claude and Google and all the various models have their own sort of privacy regulations. It's worth digging into the privacy policy and seeing what the standards are. But generally, what I use as a kind of general rule is if you're on any sort of free plan or you're using a tool in a browser and not via the API, for example, it's a pretty good assumption that at least some of your data is being used to either improve the output of the current model or train a future one. So you need to be a little careful if you're using proprietary data or client data, for example.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, great question. So the question was, I mentioned some books and things that I have read. I will say the singular call out in my talk was this co-intelligence book. It doesn't get too specific on, again, individual tools, but what it is really helpful for is he explores kind of more of the philosophical question of, like, what does work and life look like when you have this thing that just kind of can exist alongside you at any point. But another thing that I think is helpful to mention is that these tools are a little bit frustrating in the fact that they're brand new. None of them come with instruction manuals, and there are things that seem like they should be able to do them that they really struggle with, and there are very hard tasks that are very easy for the language model. So there's this kind of invisible border between the possible and the impossible, and that border shifts when you use ChatGPT versus Claude. For example, Claude is, in my opinion, quite good at writing. ChatGPT is much better at researching, but there's no sort of documentation of that anywhere. So really, it's just kind of getting into it and experimenting. And I try to just be constantly, I was telling Corey yesterday, if I don't get a task that ChatGPT or Claude or whatever fails on at least once or twice a week, I feel like I'm not, experimenting enough or pushing it hard enough. So for example, a couple weeks ago, my air conditioner wasn't working. And I was like, okay, ChatGPT, my thermostat's clicking on, my air conditioner's not working. Like, how should we debug this? And it was able to kind of walk me through some of the steps. I myself suggested that we turn the circuit breaker off before we proceed. So we did that. We did that to be safe. But yeah, right. But it was actually able to, draw me a diagram that looked like it was out of a textbook of like, here, if you take the front off your air conditioner, here's what it's probably going to look like. And from what you're telling me, it sounds like there's a fuse in the air conditioner that's just not working. It's blown. And so I went down and I pulled the cover off the air conditioner, and sure enough, it looked just like the diagram. And so I took a picture on my phone and said, okay, here it is. We've opened it up. Where am I looking? And it said, well, there's a little purple fuse up here in the top left of your image. Go pull it out and show me what it looks like. And sure enough, the fuse was blown. Went to the hardware store, got a new fuse, and put it back in, and it was great. So that is the kind of thing, like I said, that to me seems like a really hard problem that it didn't really struggle with at all, and I was kind of surprised. On the flip side, I can ask it to write me a blog post about a certain topic, and it will repeat itself 20 times over, and that to me seems like something it should be able to do. So just kind of constantly experimenting and trying to push the boundaries of what the tools can do. Because even the blessing and the curse is even when you feel like you have a good grasp on what these tools can do, the labs all release new models every 6 months. So it's like, well, there's a new, more powerful model or a less powerful but faster model that's good at some things and not others. And so it's a very rapidly shifting landscape. So that's why I recommend this book as kind of a like sort of philosophical or like a framework for a way of thinking, but then really just diving into the tools and seeing what they can do. And that'll keep you plenty busy, I'm sure. Thanks. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes. Yeah, Ethan's great. I follow him on LinkedIn, and he has a Substack as well. One of his kind of recurring tests of the AI, and you can keep me honest on this. He's the otter on the plane, right? That's his thing. So very early on, when the image models started coming out, he decided the benchmark that he was going to use for every single image model was generate me an image of an otter on an airplane using the Wi-Fi. And so 2 years ago, the image was, you could kind of recognize that it was an otter. And now with like the video models that Google has released, it's actually a full motion video of an otter sitting there in first class typing on his laptop. And so it's really cool to see that kind of consistent benchmark like change over time as the models get better. But yeah, he is definitely on kind of the forefront of this and doing a lot of that experimentation himself. Yes, I believe so. Professor at Wharton. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, he's someone good to have on your radar for sure. Yes. Sure. Hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. So I think earlier this morning there was mention of MCP, the MCP server for WordPress, which is new. And I'm not going to go too deep into the technicality of what that is, but basically, if you understand what an API is and how an API enables software to interact with other software, there's this technology called MCP, which allows AI models to interact with other software. And so what they're working on is an MCP server for WordPress, which means if you're using a tool like ChatGPT, if you hook it up to your particular WordPress site via this Model Context Protocol or MCP, it can take action on your WordPress site. So you can imagine a world where, for example, you're using ChatGPT to brainstorm about an article you want to write, you get to an outline, and right now what I have to do is copy that into WordPress, and then I can write from there. But if you had your WordPress connected to ChatGPT in this way, you could say, great, draft me a new post, put that outline in it, and then I'll go in there and finish writing in there. So I think that's a pretty promising technology there. I do like the tools for generating first drafts of alt text and things on images, which are pretty useful. Obviously, again, something you want to do a double check on because it does make mistakes for sure, or it's unclear. But that's a good one as well. And I think I saw one the other day that I'm interested in trying out that basically, if you've written a WordPress plugin but you forgot to go through and include all of the internationalization sort of strings for translation and stuff like that. It basically goes through and reworks your plugin for you so that it then supports translations, which is great. So yeah, if you're interested in like specific tooling for a lot of the WordPress stuff, I can recommend Courtney and Evan's talk from this morning. If you go back and watch the recording there, they had like basically every category, like here are tools for images, here's tools for content generation, here's tools for alt text, and they were all very WordPress focused. Cool. How we doing? All right. Still have time for a couple more if anybody has them. Otherwise, we can take a break outside. Yeah, in the middle here. Sure. So the question was, do you have any more specific advice to give about pricing if you're not doing hourly rates? I think generally, again, this is why I also recommend Jonathan Stark. He spent, I don't know, 10 or 15 years talking about this stuff probably. But generally what he recommends and how he tries to think about that is like, it's important to very early get into conversations with your clients about, what is kind of the value that they are getting out of this project. That gives you a lot more ways to anchor on what you can price for example. So, if you're building a site and it's like, cool, like we expect this to drive $100,000 in revenue in the next quarter, like it's relatively easy for you to feel confident quoting them, $10,000 for that build, for example. If you feel like on your end the math works out where you can make that happen profitably. But it really the whole pricing conversation again it gets complex and it's very nuanced. But there are definitely ways to again just like kind of start that conversation up front and go from there. Yeah, in the back there. Yes, we could try it if you like. I will admit that I was furiously typing into ChatGPT last night, asking it to predict all of your questions based on what it knew about my talk. So I was prepping last night, but we can see. So what I have here is I have the outline of my talk, and we'll go over. Actually, we'll run both ChatGPT and Claude. Do a new chat here. Here is an outline for a recent conference talk. It expected some of you to challenge me on isn't not pricing hourly, just pricing hourly while you have a secret hourly rate in your mind. And no one asked me that, so no. And I will admit that some of the questions that it covered, I then realized were good additions to the talk, and I went back and modified my slides to fit those. So it was a helpful exercise. Here's an outline for a recent conference talk. Can you answer an audience question about requesting more specific information on how to price engagements, if not hourly? So we'll see outline there. We'll see what this says. I don't think that exactly captures the gist of your question, but because I didn't have it listening in the background, it doesn't have all the context there. So, apparently I left the thinking model on, so it's going to do some thinking as well. Okay, can you give us something more concrete? How exactly should we price engagements? Not hourly doesn't make sense. Cool. So again, it gives us this little framework here, and it again asks you to decide, what outcome is it that you think you're on the hook for? What's the value on the client side? Think about what the model looks like, and then ways to kind of keep it from going off the rails, things like scope creep and stuff like that. So it gives you a couple different options down here, things you might want to try. And again, because it's relentless about giving me Chicago-specific examples all the time. So in this scenario, it imagines that I'm pitching a Chicago real estate brokerage, and gives me some actual numbers around what the outcome for the project that I'd be doing for them might be, and allows me to. It says, okay, the client's going to see all their money back in 6 months, and you avoid logging time, billing hourly, etc. So that's again, that's a good example of like just try and see sort of what the output is. And if we put this into Claude, it would give us a little bit of a different answer too. But yeah, cool. Appreciate it. Time for maybe one more if we have one. Yeah, here in the middle. Sure. He was. So we ran into the difficulties of remote work because I came back to the U.S. and Manila is a 14-hour time difference, and so he's in school most of the day. He wanted to have daily stand-ups at what would have equated to 3 a.m. my time in Chicago, and I stay up late, but not that late. So we did in a week. We got to a pretty solid working version of the game. I was going to include screenshots of that in the talk, but then I realized he was very concerned about keeping it confidential until we launched it. So I was probably shouldn't do that. But yeah, basically we were able to build what amounts to a hide and seek game where the seeker becomes like 3 times as large in the game, and the hiders are all really small. There's a bunch of stuff scattered around the map, and the seeker kind of has this dashboard on the left-hand side, and it says whether they are hot or cold based on the location of each of the hiders. And so they can wander around the map, and once they get the hider kind of in their screen and they're close enough, the hider is found, and they kind of just wander around the map and find all the hiders basically. And so I was very surprised. We only really had like 3 or 4 working days on it, and like when I say working days, I mean like a few hours each day. And we got to something that could theoretically like be shipped out into the world. He obviously had a laundry list of feature requests, and that goes back to the scope creep example we talked about earlier. But we're still working on it for sure. But yeah, the time zones are an issue. So thanks, y'all. Appreciate it.